Question. Thank you for these two presentations. When you look at the First World War, the very rare examples of having women as combatants from the Austrian perspective were in the Ukrainian and Polish legions, especially in the Ukrainian legion. And you also have women in combatant roles in Tsarist Russia. Very rarely, but you have a few ones. We don't have them further west. So my question actually to both of you would be, what would be the explanation of this, and why women in Ukrainian society were able to act as combatants, even as officers occasionally, which was not the case elsewhere?
Yes, please. Yeah. Yes, thank you very much for this interesting and very remarkable papers. First, about the Battle of Lvov, and the remark is addressed to both presenters that I haven't seen your slide of bibliography because my eyes are working not so well. Have you used something from works of Paul Robert Magocsi on a Galician question? First, next year, Magocsi will be 70, so it's an important point in historiography of Ukraine and East Europe. Second, that he wrote not only a monograph about Galician questions, but a lot of papers too, and one of Magocsi's papers was devoted to the Lemko question and Lemko Republic. So let's go on. That's why when dividing people for Polish and Ukrainian, in this aspect, a question could be raised up that who had Lemko or generally Russian identity. As for churches, the Roman Catholic identity was equal with Polish identity. But for the Greek, the Julian Church, it's a bit complicated. Second or third, even there, even in this territory, where some inhabitants belonging to the Orthodox Church too, because if we gaze for the recent map of Poland, there is the Orthodox line in the recent Poland, and the Orthodox line and that territory cut by this Orthodox line cover a huge territory from the former Poland. And what for historiography, as far as I know, role of Orthodox believers is getting a new evaluation. For instance, your colleague Mironovich wrote a lot of about Orthodox people. As for me, I can't accept all of viewpoints of Mironovich, but as far as I read his and books of his colleagues, a huge movement of re-evaluation of. So when spoke about social strata, so first the depiction of religions is a bit more colored, or was that time. last but not least, about social strata, children and women belonged to which strata? Do we have any data about sociological statistics and about origin of those women? For instance, to what extent the rural area was represented. And I must finish it, but that time churches organized, for instance, Sunday schools and another kind of schools. And these church schools, role of these church schools in building of national consciousness, as you mentioned. And nowadays, or a bit later, in the building of national mythology on this aspect. And I am finishing with that the Ukrainian Institute for Ukrainian Studies in the name of Krypiakevich was founded in Lviv. Header of that institute was the professor at Harvard University, Yaroslav Dmitrovich Isayevich, a key figure in the. So something about. I like that institute very much because Isayevich was my old friend, but something about nation building, because the name Krypiakevich is a key name too. So that's I'm finishing my remarks, and as for Magochi, in the meantime, I propose you to change something. For instance, I'm asking your PPT file, and if you wish, I can respond you something with Magochi papers, because but that's for break. That's for break, and formal remarks for now. Thank you.
Any more questions? Yes, Gabor.
I would like to emphasize first that the importance of this presentation in the sense that they shed light on a very important transformation in how the war is seen in historiography. So there is a tendency to include what happened right after the concluding of the armistice at the Western Front. These battles as more and more as an integral part of the war and the Eastern Front. And in this sense, these two presentations, and especially Magda's presentation, is very welcome because it includes it into the frame of the First World War. And a question to Tom, although it is just a guess using the Czech parallel, but as far as I know, in the Czech case, in the interwar Czechoslovakia, the situation of the women, so the gender issue, was not necessarily based on the participation in the fighting or in the war, but that there was a very important turning point, the Great Depression, the World Economic Crisis, which changed the progressive stance to the women, which somehow revigorated this traditional view that actually the husband, the man needs to be the primary earners in the family. They should be provided with jobs by the state, and women should retire to the private sphere. So did anything similar happen in Poland, and was it reflected in the memory, or it was initially so how the female Poles were treated was initially conservative enough that this kind of change did not happen?
I would like to ask Thomas, why do we agree with the presentation? His opinion about the role of women during this period, because But at the same time, it was at least at some point a result of the spread of the ideas of the modern civil family, at least in urban settlements. And because during the process of modernization of society, it was in accordance with the traditional role of the woman, because their role was to take care of the family, while the role of man was to act publicly. And that is also a reason why women, like you said, represent a large part of members within the religious organizations, for example, despite the traditionality of the Catholic Church, for example.
Okay, I think we've collected the questions, so
maybe can I start? Okay. What is connected with my paper? I'm very glad to your opinion and your remarks. So I know the study of Pudlocki, but I know the study connected with 19th century and history of Galicia. So I didn't know any articles connected with the memory and the Battle of Lwów and interwar period. So if you have something, I would be very grateful to.
He read some papers on the 20th century.
I read his articles connected with the identity in 19th century Galicia. So thank you. What is you were asking about statistic of the children in the fight? Yes. So I know, according to statistics from the main command of Polish army, the 67% of the soldiers, volunteers in the Battle of Lwów, in the Polish side, it was the young people to 25 years. So 60-70% of the volunteers. But I don't know, I don't remember exactly how much they died. But 67% of the all soldiers were young. So, and what is problem connected with church? So this is a very interesting question, but I think so it is very complicated because we have another situation in interwar period and another in the 19th century and in the World War I. So the Greek Catholic Church was Ukrainian church and Roman Catholic Church was Polish church, but it was in the interwar period. In the World War I and in the time of the war between Polish and Ukrainian, we had a lot of examples of the Polish people in Greek Catholic churches and another Ukrainian people in Roman Catholic churches. So this war and memory of this battle was the reason why so many people were moved to another churches. So, for example, the Bishop Hrstic, who was support Ukrainian People's Republic and Ukrainian movement. So, this question which you said is connected with interwar period, but not exactly, I think, in this time of the war between Polish-Ukrainian people after World War I, I think. So, this is... yes, thank you. So, it is all...
okay, if I may add something. So, of course, Robert Magoczi is widely known in Poland, so quite often he is in Poland. So, generally speaking, we are aware of his works. Of course. And of course, Robert, you asked me about women at work. The problem is that we almost do not have works on women at work during the First World War. I know about the German examples. I think the book was even translated into English. But first, no. Second, I was not talking about the situation during the First World War, about memory of the women. And we are trying to examine these articles and newspapers articles and memoirs. It's not memorized. They work as a factory workers or etc. But something different. So that is why I was focusing on different issues. So generally, of course, they were working, but it was not memorized. Of course, when we are talking about examples of women combats, especially Ukrainian, that is why I decided to use Polish cases and not Ukrainian, because it's a big topic. And of course, if you ask me, sir, about, let's say, Ukrainian feminist movement during the war period, it would be much easier for me. Then I'm not specialist in military history, so that is why I decided to just skip it and just to focus only on women. Of course, very interesting problem is Jewish women during the First World War and how they memorize it. but I think it's also a huge topic, and it must be somebody else just to give you a proper answer. And I do not want to set some cliches, so I think it's not the place for saying cliches here. Of course, when we are talking about these different nationalities and ethnic groups in Galicia before war and during the war, of course there's the problems of Lenko, and there are not only the articles and books of Magochi, but for instance Professor Moklak, who is Lenko, he also has written a lot of, not only in Polish but also in English, and of course there's a new generation of young historians on Lenko's origins or not, and this is another fascinating topic, and of course we are taking it into consideration, but as I said, they were not very active, they were not, so politically they were not important in that time. The Jewish people were, sometimes the Germans, the small German minority were important. From sociological point of view, the Czechs people were important, and for instance from my perspective this is a wonderful topic, the Czechs women kicked out of Galicia. Yeah, and the question is why the Czech people are kicked out of Galicia. I don't know, maybe this internment camps, I have no idea. I think it's a huge, another problem, and we are talking not only in, say, male history, national history, but of course the women perspective. What is more, I think this not only social, not only gender social diversions, but also the occupations of people. So I think, at least in Inter-opinion, I don't know how it was in Hungary, single woman was treated absolutely differently, and married woman was treated absolutely differently. So very often, if they were asked to give a speech, it was better for you to be married. And even when we try to examine the members, so female members of Polish Diet in Inter-period, no single woman was elected. Only married women and the women of another politicians. So I think it also showed the attitude, and of course that is why the memory was like it was. Of course I do agree about the church role and the church schools, especially for the Ukrainians, no doubt at all. I think it's another brilliant topic. And of course even about urban settlements, I think we can talk during the discussion because the time is over. So I can try to give you some examples during the breaks. Sorry, because this Polish panel is a bit prolonged. Yeah.
Okay. Good news is that we are still ahead of our time, at least 10 minutes. But we take the break now, and we shall come back after 15 minutes. Okay.